This time on Sega Talk, we look at the extreme Sega Genesis add-on, the 32X. Why did this thing exist? Who is responsible? And what games are even worth playing on this thing? Find out this and more on this episode of Sega Talk.
Sega Bits presents Sega Talk, a podcast talking all things Sega! With your hosts, George and Barry.
Look, it's a giant talking egg. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the master here. So what?
Hello and welcome to Sega Talk episode 117. I'm your host, George, and like always with me is the X to my 32, Barry.
I'm the 32X man.
I noticed that. Very extreme. Very.
Yeah.
And, well, this show is only possible with viewers like you. That's my PBS plug right there. But,
Nice.
Barry, do you want to plug our Patreon?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you check us out at patreon.com/segabits, you can essentially pick what we talk about on the show. You can have your memories read at the top of the show if it is your pick, and then have your memories read at the end if you are a Patreon supporter at any level. And we give you guys the heads up like a week or 2 weeks in advance before that episode drops, and you get to say whatever you want, and for better or worse, we will read everything you write, though sometimes if you write too much, I'll start talking real fast because it's some of the memories people have. But hey, George, this episode was actually picked by Nicholas Schaefer, who's been a longtime supporter of us. So, as is the custom, I'm going to read Nicholas's thoughts about the 32X. So, Nicholas says, the 32X is something that has always fascinated me. In a lot of ways, it was ahead of its time and what made Sega so great. On the other hand, it probably was the first step in the downfall of Sega, and for me it represents the biggest what-if in Sega history. What if Sega went all in on the 32X and wrote it out to the Dreamcast like the PS4 Pro? How many of the Saturn games would have worked on the 32X? How many of them would have pushed to the Dreamcast? Could we see a model of the Genesis with the 32X included? What if Sega never released the 32X and Sega of America focused all their efforts on the Sega Saturn? Not divided, would Sega be able to release the Saturn with a more robust launch lineup? Would that be enough to make the Saturn more successful? Obviously, it would never overtake the PlayStation, but maybe be on par with the N64 in market share. And the reality is that Sega divided itself, left a bad taste in some customers and game developers' mouths, and this took Sega from being the fastest growing in the market share to the uphill battle in distance third for the Dreamcast that did so much right but couldn't make it over that hill. Today, my concern is for game preservation. So much unique Sega history is on consoles, so few people, even less, have the ability to play CDX games. I eagerly look forward to your discussion.
Right. And he's right. You know, like, there's some good stuff about the 32X, especially when I started looking at the history. I know last time when the last episode, I was kind of coming off as a hater. I'm actually not a hater. I hate that what it was. Like, I feel like there was more potential, and it was, I think, ahead of its time, and I guess I'll talk about my opinions a little bit later, but the Sega 32X was a video game add-on for the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive console, released in 1994. It was designed as to enhance the console's processing power, adding 32-bit graphics and improved sound capabilities. The 32X was developed by Sega of America in partnership with several other companies. Barry, what is your history with the Sega 32X?
Well, let me tell you. You know, the 32X, it was one of, just like the Sega CD, it existed at around a time when I was being heavily marketed to by Sega through largely the Sonic the Hedgehog Archie comics. And so I was aware that games were coming out for it. There was a big push, and I didn't grab it to show it, but I'm pretty sure if we did the episode for Knuckles Chaotix, I'd be holding it up right now. But they did a comic book tie-in, and they would explain, in there, like, what exactly the game was, what it was for. And so they didn't aggressively push the 32X and the Sega CD when it came to the video game adaptations, but they definitely were like, check out the game, and, see the rest of the story or something like that. So I was aware there was a Knuckles game. I knew it was an add-on, but it kind of just came and went so quickly that I never really had the chance to even consider buying it. Yeah, like I think a lot of people now think that these things were like deeply clearanced and we were all aware of them, and like we were running to stores and just like buying used 32X or like new 32Xs for like $20. Wasn't really the case. Like this stuff would just kind of come and go under the radar a lot of times, and you'd be lucky if you had the foresight to go out and pick it up, because there's a reason why this stuff is like sitting on a shelf for $20, and no one's buying it. If it was moving off the shelves, and little Barrys and Georges at the time were like, well, I remember buying my 32X as soon as I learned that it was on the chopping block and that Sega was moving on. Like in our minds, that tells us that's a red flag. We don't want to buy that. That's shit.
And plus,
and I guess a comparison would be like the Kinect. Like if you weren't all in it with the Kinect at the get-go, you're not going to run out to the store and buy one for half off when it's being deeply discounted. You're going to move on from it. And, maybe unlike the 32X, the original Kinect hasn't shot up in price. But yeah, so fast forward to about 2009, and I actually did buy a 32X. I don't recall how much I spent on it, but it was probably $30 or $40 for a 32X and all the cables. I used a website called Collectors Cards and Games, and they sold me a lot of 32X games. It was a very, even at the time in 2009, it was like a very low-tech website. You basically read a list of games that he had, and then you'd email him, and he would tell you if it was still available.
It's still low. I'm looking at the site now.
It's still around, but what's there is probably not what he's selling anymore.
Right.
But I got Chaotix in box for $20. I have it here. I got Tempo in box with the manual for $8. I got Calibri new, I think, for like next to nothing. So like that just tells you just how easy it was to get this stuff decades later. So if anything, I don't really feel like I missed out on the clearing out post failure, because even in 2009 you could get a 32X for next to nothing. And I actually, let me see, do I have it? No, I can't find my original order, but yeah, it was just like $30. It was nothing.
So, yeah,
that's me.
This is like the equivalent to a boomer like showing all their houses. Like, I bought this one for $10,000 when McDonald's. That's the Sega collector's equivalent when you get those cheap prices back then.
Right.
My history was kind of strange because when I was a kid, I really liked the idea of like buying these obscure consoles that no one knew about.
Right.
And I remember seeing the Activator and this, basically, like, I don't know how much it was back in the day, but my parents wouldn't buy it for me because they knew there was a reason it was in clearance. So they're like, no. And then, like, a few years later, one of my cousins got it in the swap meet, and I remember the frustration because we were like, oh, we need another power adapter. We only had one, so now I had to go look for a separate one. And then it was just like so many, and then there's like a different cable that you connect to the actual Genesis, no? Or is it just the power? There's like another cable, right?
It all depends if you're on the Model 1 or Model 2. If you go to the website GameTrog, they actually have a very helpful way of doing all the proper connections, but it's a headache. And I just looked it up. I got it actually. I ended up buying it off eBay for $30.
I mean, it just went up in value, so it's a good price. So that was my experience with the 32X. He only had like a wrestling game, which is very disappointing because it isn't one of the best games on the console. But most of my playing on the 32X has been emulators. So let's go with that. I still don't even own a 32X, even though as a fan. Isn't that crazy? Maybe I should.
That is
buy
wild.
One.
Yeah.
I was thinking about buying the EverDrive at the Pro model that has it built in. That we don't have to. I don't know if it has that one built in or it's a CD. I'm not sure. It's one of those. It has the function built into it. But yeah. Outside of that, I think it sucks that it was so hard to connect. I feel like if they figured out something easier, and they had other plans for it. We'll talk about it in the development, which we'll get into now. So, Sega's development of the 32X.
30. You Freudian slip there. The 32X.
Yes.
You're like the AVGN. What the fuck is this? The 32X?
Right. Sorry. That I had to research it. I was watching that episode last night. So, it's not just because of Nintendo. A lot of people, Nintendo was working on something, and it did spark Sega wanting to make a new 32 console or big console or add-on. But actually, according to a lot of people, it's because the emergence of video game consoles during 1993 and during the early 90s. I don't think people know that video game consoles were kind of like the Wild West. Sega kind of broke. People were afraid of Nintendo back in the day because they had like 90% of the market share. When Sega took half, it kind of made other companies go, why can't we do the same thing? Sega went from zero to, a few percentages to having almost 50%. And this meant that we had other consoles like the Neo Geo, the Atari Jaguar, and the 3DO. Do you remember this time period when all these weird consoles were coming out and it felt like almost anything could happen? I mean, that's how I felt as a kid. It's like, what is a Neo Geo? SNK? Don't they make arcades?
Right.
So what's your opinion of these minor consoles growing up?
Yeah, I remember all of these. I really remember the 3DO and the Philips CDI. I've talked in the past how my dad got a Philips CDI because it's not because it was a game console. It was because it was like kind of an all-in-one entertainment system machine. Like nowadays, I guess you would, I don't know what you'd compare it to. Maybe, you know what, you'd probably compare it to like buying a HomePod or like a nice, one of those nice built-in speakers with like Alexa in it. Because what it could do is it would play CDs, so music CDs very well, photo CDs, which are when you have photos processed, it gives you a disc. It would give you, it played VCDs, video CDs, so like pre-DVD stuff. It played educational software, music software, game software. So it was really an all-in-one device, and it was kind of at the advent, too, of CD-ROM technology. So it was actually really neat to see things like the 3DO and the CDI come out because it was really trying to tap into everything that the CD itself could do. The Jaguar, though, and the Neo Geo, like, I was aware of them, but I never really understood them because, honestly, I didn't know Atari made the Jaguar, which sounds kind of weird, but
right.
It seemed so disconnected from the 2600. It didn't seem it was, like, the same company. And then I'd see the little Atari logo there on the ads, and I'm like, the hell, are they still making stuff?
Right.
Neo Geo, I mean, that's one that I wish at the time I knew more about because I'm actually a really big SNK fan now, and I've talked before on the show how I just a month ago I picked up my Pocket Color, and I absolutely love it. It's just such a
great
it's such an amazing little handheld. It's like, people go on and on right now about the Playdate. But honestly, this to me is like the best of everything portable without so many downgrades. I think the Playdate just is too downgraded to the point where it's like, stick and ball, like, hey, gamers. It just, I don't know. But regardless, those minor consoles, yeah, there was always something unique about each one, but none of them really had everything going for it. And that's why they all failed. And it's kind of unfortunate that the 32X really does feel more like those. It's kind of hard to explain. Like, You know, like when you think of certain consoles, do you feel something, George, like an emotion inside your belly or in your heart?
Yeah, I actually.
Yeah.
There's something. Something, I don't know. Like the Neo Geo was one of those, like, I guess, hardcore gamer consoles, like, because they were like, every game was like very expensive. It was literally, you owned an arcade. That was what you were buying. It was really niche. I think, I don't know if I would consider it a failure, because I think they supported it all the way to like 2002, which I would say is kind of ridiculous. But all they did was release their arcade games for home. That was literally what they were doing, very expensively. Atari Jaguar was a big pop. Like, I think it was a big failure because I've never played it. Like, I've never met someone that had it growing up. I met one person that had a 3DO, and some of the SNK games actually impressed me on it because they had the arcade zoom in. And now my camera went away. I don't know why. Yeah, besides that, I enjoyed I enjoy SNK games, and I agree with you. The handheld is actually really good. Neo Geo Pocket, I think I used to own it. I actually traded my Game Boy Color for a Neo Geo Pocket and never regretted it because I feel like the games were so unique. And I do like the Game Boy Color, but a lot of the games were just Game Boy games, really. I mean, that's what it was, with a couple colors in it. So, yeah. Do I? As for the Neo Geo, if you could afford it with the prices they are online, I would say buy it. I really love the aesthetics of the Neo Geo, but it's super expensive. Like, it's like,
right.
I think the most expensive console right now, even Sega Saturn, is a little behind on price. I mean, you could buy some Sega Saturn games cheap. That's all. Every single game on the Neo Geo is expensive.
And I guess I kind of brought up that feeling you get about consoles because it seems like every Sega console I have some sort of like happy, nostalgic, excited feeling when I think about like playing the console. But the 32X just kind of makes me feel a little icky inside. I don't know, like it makes me feel like it just reminds me of how hard it is to hook up, how hit or miss the library is, how ugly it makes the Genesis look. I mean, I have one here. Like the little tiny one that goes with the Mini. It looks okay on top of the Model 2, but it doesn't look good. It doesn't look great. It just kind of I don't know, it's like a meme. You know what I mean? Like, and by that I mean when you look at it, it's like a joke. You look at it and you see it on like the little mini model of it, and the joke is that it looks stupid.
Right.
Whereas the CD attachment, you're like, God, that looks so fucking cool. But then this 32X on top, you're like, that's funny. And I think the Tower of Power kind of became a joke where people would plug in as much shit they could. And there's those photos of like 32Xs. You know?
I think we need to like do a Sega Bits like certified version of it where we make it like super tall, where we do a world record with our name on it.
Yeah.
Like, I think that would be possible. We were gonna have to get a lot of Game Genies and Sonic and Knuckles copies.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Well, Sega did make the Sega CD. The device didn't perform as well as Sega's intended, but they still needed new technology to catch up to rivals, or at least that's what Sega thought. I think the Sega Genesis would have lasted another like 4 years if they actually released games for it. Like, just continue releasing good games. They already had kind of like a plethora of IPs on it, but I mean, Sega didn't agree with me there. One of the big things that screwed over Sega, though, during the time was how much money they were using for R&D for new technology. While on paper, it's good to have fresh ideas, the company sort of went overboard. During the 90s, not only did we have the Sega CD, they also tried to develop technology for the Sega Genesis add-on, the Aviator, and then they were also developing Sega VR, which never came out, and they were working on 4 32-bit consoles, or at least console ideas. Each one was named after a planet during 1994 or 1993, really. We had Project Mars, which became the 32X. We had the Sega Saturn, which we already know what that became, obviously. And the 2 other consoles that never made it included the Sega Jupiter, which would have been a cartridge-based 32-bit console with similar specs to the Sega Saturn. This basically the idea would be that like you would buy a cheaper Sega Jupiter that was just cartridge-based, and then you could make a CD add-on later. I guess because CD technology was so expensive at the time, so the idea would be that that's why people say that the Sega Saturn has that slot in the top that just became a memory or RAM backup. Was supposed to be that it was supposed to play cartridges for a while. So the idea would be, according to the Edge rumor, was that that the Sega Jupiter would cost 30,000 Japanese yen compared to the 50,000 Japanese yen that the Sega Saturn ended up costing. And of course the CD would be optional if you wanted to. Sadly, no prototypes of the Sega Jupiter were ever produced. And the idea was dead by mid-1994 because the CD format was cheaper to produce than cartridges. So, what do you think about the Sega Jupiter concept? We know Nintendo still moved on with cartridges. Do you think Sega was on the right track to give this a try?
I think the issue was at the time that, I mean, just as the market itself was putting too many new pieces of hardware, like the Neo Geo CDO or 3DO CDI, Sega themselves were putting out a lot of stuff between 93 and 95. I mean, you just think about it. You have not just the Genesis, but multiple hardware revisions. You have the Sega
Game
CD
Gear?
Model 1s and 2s, the Game Gear, the Power Base Converter, Sega Pico, Sega Pods, Sega arcade handhelds with Tiger. I mean, a lot of these things were deals with other companies, but end of the day, it's more Sega product on the shelves. There was a time, and I don't remember this personally, but there was a time when you could go to like Toys R Us or a video game store, and you would see at least 3 or 4 Sega consoles being supported, either handheld or home or educational. And on top of that, you could buy Tiger, you could buy, like I mentioned, the Sega Pods, you could buy a little IR 7000 communicator, which was a little pocket calculator and address book. So they were just pumping so much shit out. And then they're like, oh, let's make the Nomad. Let's make the CDX. Which was basically just the Sega CD and a Genesis combined. And it's like, what are you doing? It's like what they really should have done is trimmed almost all that fat outside of the Game Gear and the Pico, which I think, and the CDI, or the Sega CD, and then release no Model 3, maybe even no Model 2. What you do is you make a new console that can take a new kind of cartridge as well as the old cartridges and can play CD games. So that way, that's people's upgrade. You know, that's it. They're not buying a Model 2. They're not buying a Model a CDX. They're not buying a 32X. And sure, you're screwing over the people who bought the original Sega Genesis, but that was 1989, and now it's 1994. Like, that's a decent enough jump that leaving some people in the dust is not really hurting your market. I don't think really hurting people. I mean, we see that right now with people who own Xbox Series S, and there are games they're not able to play on the Series S because they're Series X games. But they don't feel left in the dust. They're just kind of like, well, it was my decision, whatever.
Right.
But
I would say
the Jupiter could have worked if, but yeah.
I was gonna say that the Jupiter would have been kind of like what is it, the Series S, right? Or is it Series now? Yeah, right. So it's like underpowered, but this one is not underpowered, but it's on cartridge. I think it would have made it kind of confusing telling the parent that like, oh, there's a CD version and then there's a cartridge version, and that one has worse audio. And then now you have to tell developers to develop 2 and ship 2 games, plus the 32X, plus the Sega CD if you supported it. So I think you have to slim down, and I think there was an issue with the Sega Saturn early on where they knew it was going to cost a lot of money, and they were going to lose market share, and they were afraid. And I'm like, then you should have literally canceled the Sega Saturn if you didn't think you were going to be able to make it with it.
Right.
That was really what made all these projects happen, because they wanted to have all the people that only bought $200 consoles and not $400 consoles, and that's not how it works, sadly. But I love the Sega Saturn, but imagine telling your parents to pay double the price of a Sega Genesis for a console.
Right, and I mean, imagine too a scenario where, okay, the Genesis is out, it's 94, it's starting to feel a little old, and then they drop this new console on you that can play a new type of cartridge, as well as your pre-existing Sega CD games and your pre-existing Genesis games. So if you want to play these new, and you don't even need to call them 32X games, you could call them like Genesis 2X, like, just, I don't know. And that keeps people happy until 1998. And then you do a global release of the Sega Dreamcast. Imagine that, going from 32X graphics with like Metalhead to the Dreamcast. And sure,
Right.
The Saturn doesn't exist in this timeline, but a lot of those Saturn games and ideas get moved to the Dreamcast to have a stronger launch. Nights into Dreams could be a Dreamcast launch title alongside Burning Rangers and Shenmue. Imagine that.
I'd be all in
it's just,
for that.
And I was a Sega super fan at the time, and I couldn't afford all the shit they were putting out. Like, I had a Nomad and a Genesis, and that was it. And the first Sega console I bought since then was a Dreamcast. So, and I agree 100% with Tom Kalinske in his belief that the Genesis had a lot more life to it.
I agree.
I really think so.
I agree with you on the making a stopgap console that was just like, I don't know, more colors. I think the Nintendo did it right with the Game Boy Color. It literally is a Game Boy. It just literally adds these dumb colors that are not like 4 colors. I think just doubled the colors, or it's 8 maybe. But it plays all the old games, so it sold like hotcakes and kind of gave it new life. And I think that's what maybe the Genesis could have used. And that's a question I have later. But the fourth project was the Sega Neptune, and I think this was more popular because people actually found prototypes of it in the wild. The idea was to integrate the Sega Genesis and the 32X into one console that doesn't need a manual to learn how to connect together. The intent name for the console in North America would have been the Sega Genesis 32X system, which makes sense. Sega early on was truthful that the Sega 32X add-on was problematic and expensive, so the idea of combining it seemed logical at the time. The issue? The Sega Saturn was about to release. Since 32X was a stopgap add-on, the Sega Neptune got the axe. Early ideas also included, they wanted to have the Sega CD built in too, so it could be an all-in-one console, but it didn't happen. If Sega did release it, it would have come out in late 1995. People said that it was going to be pushed into winter 96, which would have basically made it compete with the Saturn, and it was supposed to retail only for $150 or 220 with a video game add-on, and the idea was to pack it with Virtual Fighter, which is pretty smart. So $150, I think the Sega Genesis launched for $200, and it kept that price for a while, and I think it went down to like what $120 with like a bundle with Sonic. So this would have been just $30 more. That's not that bad. I think it's actually a pretty good price. What do you think of the Sega Neptune concept? I like it. And would you have been interested in the Genesis 32X system? Did it really need a Sega CD? And what about the pricing?
I like the idea of the system, though I do think a CD component should have been included, because I feel like it was so odd that Sega made the Sega CDX system in such a limited supply. Like, it's such an amazing little console, but hardly anyone knows about it or owns it. Like, and when people see that, they're like, wait, that's a Sega CD and a Genesis. Does it play 32X games? No. So it's like, again, Sega's putting out way too many variants of their hardware, and not everything plays everything. So this is so close to being that system I was talking about. Like, you
Right.
look at the Saturn, and for years, when I was a kid, I thought the Saturn played Genesis and 32X games
Oh,
because
yeah.
of the cartridge slot.
Me too.
And the fact that it doesn't is so fucking dumb. Like, I get when older nerds tell me, well, actually, that's the expansion slot. And I'm like, yeah, but it looks like a cartridge slot, and this is the console that came right after the Genesis. It should have played Genesis games. I don't care if you think it's impossible. Now, as far as that pricing, I think that's a great price. And I don't know if we're going to touch on it, but to me, what they really messed up with the 32X is that, and they did do this in the final marketing, but what they really should have pushed is that it's an arcade enhancement for your Genesis. Say again and again, the arcade experiences that you get, well, you can bring that home with the 32X and pump out more games. Like, we have Afterburner and Space Harrier, but they really should have put any and every game that were big in the 80s on it. Like, before we recorded, you mentioned Outrun. They should have done G-Lock. They should have done, what's that other one that we just did? Thunderblade. Like any superscalar game. I mean, Virtua Racing we talked about. That's on there. Virtua Fighter. It's just, when you look at that library of games, it starts to kind of define the 32X in a really exciting way that I think is far enough removed from their original release that it wouldn't eat into arcade profits. Like, these are games coming out 10 years later to home console in almost near arcade perfect ports. I don't think the arcade division is going to be crying that Afterburner, and they weren't because they were releasing it. But instead, they muddied it up with, like, stupid shit that, like, no one cares about. Or, like, I love Mortal Kombat 2, but did it need another release, but on the 32X? It's just, I think a 32X system, with or without a CD, and really push that it's an arcade powerhouse, that would have really gone over well, in my opinion.
And the advertisement didn't even do that. Like, they should have shown, like, this is the arcade game. This is the 32X. For this much money, you get this at home. And it would have really kind of undermined the idea of the Neo Geo, because that's literally what it was.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, you could even just call it, title it for idiots. Call it the Sega Genesis Home Arcade
Add-on.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, not even an add-on. Just call it the Sega Genesis Home Arcade. Plays all the Genesis classics and a whole library of Sega arcade originals, I don't know, like, just that sounds exciting to me. I'd be like, oh, cool, that's exactly what I want. Instead of being like, what's 32X? Oh, it's got a game about a hummingbird. Like,
right. I like that game.
Half of the library are Genesis games, but they look a little better. Like, I don't care.
I agree with that. I think the marketing on the Sega Genesis was obviously way better. They actually pushed arcade games early on, so this didn't. So, yeah, I have to agree with you on there. So, let's talk about the creation, I guess, of the system here. How did the idea of the 32X happen? It all started when Sega console legend Hideki Sato, who made every single Sega hardware, so thank him, he's a legend, and other Sega Japan engineers traveled to North America to collaborate with Sega Soft's Joe Miller. The first plans included the idea of producing a brand new Sega Mega Drive console with double the colors and lower cost. This is probably Hideki Sato's idea. Joe Miller said it was a terrible idea and suggested instead to do an add-on for the Mega Drive. And so he became the father of the Sega 32X. Is this good or bad? I don't know. You decide. While it's normal today to release upgraded versions of consoles with the PlayStation 4 Pro, the Xbox One X, and other consoles, do you think Sega should have tried doing this route in the first place? And has any other console done this previously? Like, released the same console where you're like, oh, this is just a Super Nintendo Pro. This is the all-new Super Nintendo. I don't think they've ever tried it, so this would have made them pioneers in the idea that mid-generation, or I guess late generation at this point, right? 94 was already kind of late generation for the Sega Genesis. So would that have made people mad? The idea that you could buy a game like, I don't know, you could run Sonic 2 faster maybe, or the idea that new games could maybe play on the Genesis, or maybe there would be special games for the, I don't know, Sega Genesis Pro, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Well, here, for example, the Atari 7800 played 2600 games.
Right.
Right?
I think
and so there was that backwards compatibility there. And I feel like with the Genesis, they had a bridge with the Master System, because the Mega Drive Genesis could play Master System games. And it could, I believe, up to Model 2. Maybe Model 2 couldn't play. I don't think Model 2 could. Maybe it could. But that's why I feel like a Sega 32X system wouldn't really be a bad idea. I just think the problem is when you make it just a add-on, you are asking a lot of people, because you're saying spend the amount of a new console, but if you don't own a Genesis, you're going to have to find one used or buy one. And I just think it was asking too much. And then the connectivity was really hard to understand. It is very difficult. This is not plug and play. Now, I brought up the Kinect earlier. The Kinect with the original Xbox 360 was also a headache to plug in. You would connect it, you would put an extension cable on it, you would run that to the back. If you had the Wi-Fi adapter, you had to get an extender for that and have it only connected to the front. The Wi-Fi adapter could not connect to the back, and the Kinect could not connect to the front. That sounds like a headache. But then you get the Xbox 360 upgraded version, which I ended up buying later. You plug the Kinect into it, and it works. There's no power source. There's no extra cables. It's just plug and play. And if this was plug and play and it was priced under $100, I think it might have some legs. The alternative is to have it be an all-in-one bridge system, and they did neither one. They basically asked people to drop the amount of money that you would for a new console, and that was idiotic. It was really stupid.
I think this would have worked perfectly if they made whatever new games, right? Let's say they made a Sonic 4, and then when you played it on your Sega Genesis Pro, whatever you want to call it, it looked better, it ran better, and then you could also play it in the old on the Sega regular Genesis. That way they wouldn't lose market share at all. That would have been the perfect. But you can also tell that Sato here was thinking about 2D and enhancing 2D, and that's why and that was a mistake for the Sega Saturn, because everyone wanted to go 3D. But you could tell here that he himself wanted to stay in 2D and make better 2D games.
Right, but you make a great point there. Like, Sega has very stupidly never used numbered Sonic games to sell new hardware, and they really should have. Sonic CD should have been Sonic 2. Knuckles Chaotix should have never existed, and instead you could have called it Sonic and Knuckles 2. Or you could have called it Sonic 4, starring Sonic and Knuckles. You know, like something stupid. But, like, that would have sold copies. Those games sold insanely well, and instead they were like, oh, Yuji Naka, you're such a good man. You know what? We're going to let you make whatever the hell you want for the Saturn. You don't make Sonic 4. Just make Knights. Make a game about a jester. And then, for the GameCube, make a game about a chicken boy. Like, it just seems like they were so lenient with these creators. And I honestly wish they were a little more strict with some of them. And they said, look, you made a hit game. We're going to have to pump them out for the next 10 years. Sorry.
Right. Yeah, and
we're not an art house.
Right. As a kid, it was kind of frustrating because let's be honest, me and you, we wanted a Sega Saturn Sonic game. Like, be it 2D, be it 3D, we just wanted one. And it didn't really have anything. It had, like, other companies doing it, which wasn't the same. So, let's talk about the, I guess, showcase of... So, Sega Japan deflated the hype of the Sega 32X by officially announcing the Sega Saturn during Winter CES 1993. Even though they didn't have any titles to show, they still decided that they were going to show it off. The idea was that by 1994, the Sega Saturn would replace the Mega Drive with the unseen Sega Jupiter we talked about earlier, being a cheaper alternative. So the idea was by 94, the Sega Saturn would be out, which kind of did happen, actually. The Sega Saturn came out in Japan in November 22nd, 1994. The 32X came out in North America on November 21st. So, yeah, literally the day after they released it in Japan. Isn't that crazy?
That is wild.
They didn't even let it breathe or anything. They're just like, we're going to release it. Anyway, what do you think of Sega Japan undermining the idea of the 32X by announcing the true successor to the Sega Genesis, even though they hadn't even had games produced for it?
I mean, Sega were their own worst enemy at this time. There's just so much stupid infighting, and if you're watching The Mandalorian right now, the big arc are all of these warring factions of the Mandalorians, and really the true enemy is the Empire, but the Empire has basically caused the factions. And so it's like, with Sega, the true enemy is Nintendo. But instead, you have Sega Japan, Sega America butting heads, infighting, and creating basically, the seeds of downfall for the company. This stuff's going to fester for years and really hurt them even along, when the Dreamcast comes around. And it was just idiotic. Someone needed to tell them to cut this out, and they just, I don't know. Yeah, there should have been a dad figure come in and say, you know what, 32X, we're not making it, we're all in on the Saturn. Or say, you know what, we're not making a Saturn, all in on the 32X, bridge system with the Mega Drive, and focus on the Dreamcast, focus on a 1998 worldwide launch for a console. Done. Yeah,
it's insane. It's insane how much they supported the Game Gear, like you said. They had the Nomad. They had that. Somebody had to R&D that and created Sega CD. Yeah. You just go on and on all these things, and you're like, how do you? No wonder you were broke.
But the thing is they're brilliant pieces of hardware, but they were not mass produced. There aren't hundreds of thousands of Nomads out there. There aren't hundreds of thousands of Sega CDXs, and that's just kind of what boggles my mind, is that Sega made such excellent, well-built hardware, and yet there was a period of time where they were making boutique, it was limited run. Right, it's limited run Sega game consoles. It's so weird. What is going on? And yet they mass-produce the 32X. There's more of these available than there are CDXs or Sega Nomads. And Sega Nomad is an amazing piece of hardware. It's absolutely amazing that came out around the time when Nintendo was making these little blippy bloopy pieces of crap, and Neo Geo was just a few years away from releasing the Pocket Color, which is amazing, but you compare it to the Genesis Nomad, it's insane. But
the only thing that
I think
the screen, I love that the bright screen, but it does suck that they never figured out the battery. I think if they figured that out, a good compromise, it would have sold like hotcakes. I think Nintendo would have had to release something themselves. So, the Sega 32X was finally revealed during Sega's Gamers Day event in June 1994, and that was actually the first Sega Gamers Day event. It ran from that to 2008, and then they stopped. If they brought it back, that would be sick, but... this was the first Sega Gamers Day event, and Sega promised that they would deliver 32-bit gaming by the end of the year, which they did. Sega Saturn being held back because of technology costs, not in Japan, but in America. Sega would continue to talk about the 32X as a stopgap to the Saturn, even stating that it would help be a cheaper option considering how expensive the Sega Saturn was. The idea would be that Sega gamers could play 32-bit games until the Saturn became more affordable. What do you think about the sales pitch? Wouldn't it have been more expensive to buy a 32X games and then later having to buy all brand new games for the Sega Saturn?
Not a very smart sales pitch. And again, it was an extension to the Mega Drive Genesis, just as the Sega CD was. Difference is Sega CD came out much earlier in the lifespan, so you could forgive it. I think a lot of people group these two together, and they're like, oh yeah, the 32X is shit, and so is the Sega CD. And it's like, no, Sega CD had a very long, quite successful history and a great library of games, and it was very well implemented both in the Model 1 and Model 2, the way it connected. But 32X just came so late in the lifespan, had such a small library, and it was just such a stupid ask of people to be like, all right, the Saturn's coming, but in the meantime, do you want to drop $150 and a whole library of games? And it's idiotic. Again, it was a really, really poorly thought out decision. Yeah.
I agree. I think telling your gamer, like right away if you told me, hey, you know that cool console that's coming out? The true successor? This right here, this will hold you off until you could afford it. I'd be like, what? Can you imagine if like the PlayStation 2 had a add-on that was a worse PS3, and then they're like, maybe one day you'll afford a PS3, but right now, and I'm like, I'll just buy a Xbox 360. Why would I, you know? Like PlayStation was coming out cheaper, and the Nintendo 64 was cheaper. Why would I buy this when I could just save up and buy a Nintendo 64 for $200?
Yeah, right. Yeah, like George, there's Nintendo just announced the Switch 4K. It's coming out in 2025. But in the meantime, there's this really cool add-on for the existing Switch. It has its own cartridge slot. There's about a library of maybe 30 games, and it costs $150. You in?
No, that's what I'm saying. It's just not a good sales pitch, and it really showed you that they're literally telling you it's only a stopgap, meaning there won't be development for it any like longer than a few years. Kind of sounds like
right
when you say stopgap.
It kind of, you know what it feels like? The 32X is kind of like what the DCEU is right now. Because they're telling people to go to theaters to see these like 4 or 5 tentpole movies that are going to lead to nothing. Right. And it pisses me off to no end to see these articles going, Shazam 2 is the lowest performing DCU movie. What a fucking blunder. What a piece of shit.
I saw that yesterday.
I actually liked it. I enjoyed it, but it's like, but you put out a movie where the head of your studio told everyone the next 5 movies don't matter until my Superman movie comes out, and then on top of that, you undermarket it, and then 3 weeks into the release of the movie, you release it to digital. So it's like, don't give me that news story where you're like, oh, it's the worst performing movie. You made it the worst performing movie. Well,
it was kind of... They kind of blessed it in the end, though, because they had James Gunn's wife make a cameo, and she's canon, obviously, so...
I mean, yeah, that's a whole other podcast, but James Gunn is kind of acting like SEGA at that time, where they're like, oh, we got a really exciting new thing on the horizon, but in the meantime, go watch 5 movies. You know, we have a new Superman movie, but The Flash is coming out, and Batman from 1989's back, like...
I heard that the Flash is supposed to tie into the new universe, so maybe that will... I think that might do good just because it has the old Batman. I don't think anyone cares about anything else.
No, I think they're going to retroactively make that the reboot movie for sure. But still, it's just... It kind of feels like... Yeah, like Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is the 32X of movies. You know?
Yeah. Oh, like, for sure. If that bombs, I'm going to be like... I mean, I would be mad.
Of course it's going to bomb. They're going to say it made less than Shazam 2.
It's going to make less than the first one, because I think the first one did $1 billion. I don't think that's going to do $1 billion at all.
No.
So, the Sega 32X finally came out in mid-November in North America and was priced at $159.99, $10 more than was promised, and it also did not come with a game like it was initially expected. Only a few 100,000 units were produced in North America for its launch, but orders actually were in the millions, according to online sources. During its initial release, the 32X actually was well received by the gaming press. 350,000 units were originally shipped within the first 3 weeks of release, with 200,000 being sold during the Thanksgiving weekend alone. By the end of 1994, Sega had sold 600,000 units. By 2 months, Sega claimed to have sold more 32X units than the 3DO sold in consoles, although these claims have been disputed. Are you surprised that the first 2 months during the holidays, it sold almost 1 million units? and was so well received by critics at the beginning of its lifespan. Are you surprised? Because a lot of people shit on it, like online. Like
I'm not surprised. It kind of, again, to compare it to the Kinect had a really solid launch. A lot of people were praising it. They were seeing the difference in the library. They were like, well, yeah, it's a little more dancey, fitnessy, kiddie, but it's giving those audiences games that they enjoy. And I remember, a lot of those games got fairly good reviews. There were some indie titles coming out, like Gunstringer was actually a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that one. And I think it sold really well, but it did not sustain, just like the 32X. It didn't keep it up. It just it was like a flash in the pan.
Right.
And I don't think that was what Sega was hoping for. I think they wanted to have something that would sustain for maybe a year, not 2 months.
Right. And so, by, let me see, by January 1995, after the holidays, it was reported that 10% of the units had been returned to stores because of how difficult it was for consumers to set up the machine. This led to Sega offering an easier-to-read manual, adding RF units in future packagings, and offering a phone line for help. What's your opinion on the 32X setup? I think we talked about it. It was very complicated, I think.
It is very complicated. Do you, are you able to share like a web screen?
Yeah, send me a link and I can do it.
All right, I'm gonna send you the link in our chat here.
In Discord?
You can on Skype.
Got you. I got it.
So if you check this out, so this is the website I used when I bought my 32X off eBay. Now, if you scroll down to roughly the middle of the page, a little bit after the middle,
trying to get. Trying to see the window. Okay. Let me open it up.
Yeah.
Oh my god, my internet is going crazy. Give me a sec.
No problem.
All right. See if it works.
So if you scroll down to roughly halfway to the bottom, it's going to show you the back.
You need.
Yeah, right. Look at all. This is all the stuff you need. So, and this is the easier connection. This is the Model 2. So a Model 2 Sega Genesis and a Model 2 Sega CD is a far easier connection than a Model 1 Sega Genesis and a Model 2 Sega CD, which is what I have. But you see it pops in the top there, and you need a 32X AV out, 32X AV in, 32X AC adapter, Genesis AV out, Genesis AC adapter, Sega CD RCA stereo out, Sega CD AC adapter, 3 AC adapter, 3 power bricks, all of these things. And I'm moving. I think I'm moving all my consoles this week. I am not disconnecting any of these cables. I'm going to unplug them. I'm going to kind of loop them around, set them on top, and I'm just going to put this in a box and drive it over to the house because there is absolutely no way I'm doing this again.
Can you imagine?
It is the biggest headache.
Your mom having to connect this for you?
You know what? I actually, for a good solid 5 years, thought I had a defective Sega CD model. Turned out I had the wrong plugs. I swapped the plugs, the power plugs, and the Sega CD was not getting enough power, and the 32X was getting, I think, too much power or something. And so they weren't working properly. And one day I just looked at this website again, and I'm like, oh, there's different power bricks. There's the MK1602 AC unit, the MK2103 AC unit, and then you have another MK2103. And it was just like, are you kidding me? There's multiple AC adapters? I can't even use the same... Oh, what a mess. What a stupid mess.
You know how we said that it should be interchangeable, with the old Genesis? The power brick wasn't even interchangeable. That tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah.
So,
stupid.
I did, so this is a perfect time to bring this up. It's just on the bottom of the notes, but I looked at how much power this machine draws. Okay, so the Sega Genesis draws between 10 to 15 watts of power, depending on the model. The Sega CD draws an additional 12 watts, and the Sega 32X draws 10 watts. So together, they would consume about 32 to 37 watts. It's not too bad. While the Sega Saturn Japanese Model 1 draws 20 watts. So technically the Sega Saturn draws way less. And the Japanese Dreamcast draws 60 watts. But the North American console draws 40 watts, which is weird. It's
Wow.
like 20 watts less on the
Yeah.
in the international. So that gives you so the 32X, Sega CD, and all that put together, almost 40 watts, which is double of the Saturn. That's crazy.
Wow. That is.
Right. So, where did I leave in my notes? By mid-1995, Sega executives realized their blunder, but it was too late. Developers and licensees had abandoned the console in favor of what they perceived to be the true 32-bit console, the Sega Saturn. And even though the 32X add-on was a 32-bit system, the games weren't taking full advantages of the system's capabilities and were not compatible with the Sega Saturn hardware. Many games were 2D, Rush, and slightly upgraded Mega Drive titles, and many chose to skip the 32X completely, citing the expensive price. In early 1996, Sega of America instructed all 32X developers to abandon their projects and convert them to Sega Saturn games. Store shelves became littered with unwanted 32X systems, and prices for the new systems dropped as low as $19.95 in the US.
Wow.
I actually would have been sick to buy like the whole stock because they just went up in price. Like having them complete in box, brand new, never touched. You could probably sell them each for like $500. Even
true.
though it had about 40 games, would the 32X be worth it for $20 for a Kid Berry?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
I would have loved to have had it. I had a Genesis Model 1 at the time, but I didn't have a Sega CD, so I would have connected that and been happy. That would have been sweet.
Right.
But didn't happen.
Okay. So right here, let's talk a little bit about the games for the system. I think there's a list, but I don't think we really need to see the list because, let's be honest, there's only a few games that are really worth, I think, buying a 32X for, and I think that's like Knuckles Chaotix is one of them. I think it's probably the tip top because it's never been released anywhere else. It's a very unique game, and I don't think we've had the Chaotix have such a, I don't know, like literally being in the title. This is the creation, right, of the Chaotix, right?
It is, yeah. They there were a few different like manuals for different regions that told different stories. The comic book I mentioned from Archie told one of them, but it was fun at the time. Like Sonic had his stable of friends, and so I really loved the idea that Knuckles had his own group of friends, and they all had really cool abilities like wall running, wall like latching onto, and Sonic can do some of those now in some games, which is kind of cool. But I know we're not going to go through all of them. I actually have my games stacked up here. Do you want me to hold up the ones I own and just give you a very quick impression of if they're worth owning or not? I guess?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
All right.
Let me put it.
So these are the ones that I don't have my loose cartridges. I think I have about 8 of them in the other room. But I'll kind of call them out if I remember them. First up, Metalhead, I think is actually a really fun game. It's a 3D mech game that actually was made by Sega Japan. I think it's from the director of Shadow. No, what's the one? The sequel to Shinobi PS2.
Nightshade, I think, or Night Dancer.
I think the director of that made this. So this is actually a really good one. Colibri, again, from a notable person. It's from
the guy that did
director of
Dolphin.
Yeah,
the
Ed.
Echo Dolphin.
Right? We just call him Ed.
Yeah, Ed.
From Echo the Dolphin. Shadow Squadron is actually a really fun little 3D game. Again, I believe this is actually Japanese developed. And then, like NFL Quarterback Club. Not worth getting. It's one of those games that you can get on other consoles. Same with Mortal Kombat 2. It's slightly better, but again, you can get that on other consoles. So it's kind of like there's a mix of games that are unique and interesting and I'd say worth checking out, like Colibri and Shadow Squadron and Metalhead. And then there's the games that, like, I guess it's cool that they're a little upgraded, but what's the point,
Right.
And then I've got the games here that I think are just like must-owns. So, for example, Afterburner, must-own. Space Harrier, must own, though the Genesis Mini 2 outdoes it. Like, it's more arcade accurate running on hardware. Knuckles Chaotix, must own.
If you could afford it.
If you can afford it. But then you got weird ones like Doom. Like, it's cool to play Doom, but there's some downgrades, and there's actually a better version out there now that actually has, like, the music implemented properly. I have 4 more here. And then there's Virtua Racing, must own. I think that's a fantastic port.
Oh, yeah.
Zaxxon's Mother Base 2000, actually not a Zaxxon game. It's a different game. They just gave the Zaxxon name to it. But this is fun. Again, it's more in the category of, like, Calibri and Shadow Squadron. Then there's the shit. Tough Man Contest. What is this?
Why is there...
Why is
that
this?
Butterbean?
So, he's stepping on a guy's neck. And then there's ones that are kind of like Tempo, for example. I actually got this new, but opened it. And this is kind of like Chaotix, where it's a very unique platformer. It's not the best, but it's worth checking out. And then some of the loose ones I have are like Virtua Fighter. It's just kind of like the definitive home console version of Virtua Fighter before they ended up releasing it on like the Astro City Mini. And then there's oddities like the WWF games.
Yeah.
I'd say the best one I don't own is that Spider-Man game.
Right. The Web of Fire.
And then there's also a game called Blackthorn, I think it is.
Yeah, it has. I think I've seen that one. Is that the one, or is that Dark Side? No, it's. I think it's Blackthorn. It's the one that has Danzig on the cover. I think.
Yeah. And then finally, there's like, if you like these things, which I do, there's the Sega CD 32X games, which are unique because they are actually basically Sega CD games that utilize the 32X to have increased video capabilities. So, like, these aren't great games like Corpse Killer, Supreme Warrior, Night Trap, and I have Fahrenheit. But if you want to play them, this is the best way to play them. So it's kind of like a weird sort of category where it's like not great games, but the best way to play not great games. And they had a very unique logo. Like, look at that. It's the Sega CD 32X logo. But then at one point they weren't really sure if they should do that, and so they gave it like a blue Sega CD logo.
Oh,
you know?
Weird.
So it's kind of funny how they at one time did a co-branded release. So, like, you can see that. It's only 40 games, and I don't think there are enough must-own titles to make it a must-own console then or now. But it was, like, almost like, what is it in Rogue One, where the guy's like, we're on the verge, we're this close to greatness, you know. The 32X was very close, I think, to greatness. I think if they just kind of dropped the Mortal Kombats, the NFL quarterback clubs, the Tough Man contest, and really focused on stuff like Calibri, Chaotix, Space Harrier, you know, like a mix of unique platformers with really beautiful graphics and arcade perfect ports. And Sonic 5, or Sonic 4, you know? Or actually, let's say Sonic 5. Let's say that Sonic 4 already happened. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's fun to collect for, though. I mean, you saw I just showed probably half the library.
Right. Because it's so easy to finish it.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know, right? Well, then there's one like super expensive game, but you can buy repros actually if you really care. But yeah,
let's talk about
that's my little run through.
What could have been, right? So, a lot of canceled games for this that moved to the Sega Saturn or never came to a Sega console. So let's talk about some that could have changed the course. So, like, maybe Alone in the Dark, having a horror game would have been cool. Booger Man, I don't know why you would want a port of the Genesis game, but okay. The Castlevania would have been big, I think. The Bloodletting.
Yes.
Daytona USA. Die Hard Trilogy was a PS1 game. I remember playing it on there. I think it might have had a Saturn port. Echo the Dolphin 32X, but that one was on Sega CD too, wasn't it?
Yeah, not really necessary. Yeah.
Garfield. No, I'm joking about that one. Outrun would have been big, I think. Panzer Dragoon. Rayman 32X, maybe having a more...
That would have been cool.
Yeah. Sonic Mars. Spot Goes to Hollywood has some history with us because of what's name buying the repo, remember?
Right. Yeah, Spot Goes to Hollywood was an unreleased game that for a time one of our writers owned, and people were begging him to dump it, and he's like, I don't know how, help me. But someone eventually dumped it. But you passed over Pinocchio, which I actually played not too long ago. That's actually a really beautifully made game, but it's not that fun.
Right.
But like graphically, yeah. But the 32X upgrades for it are kind of cool. It looks pretty neat. But yeah, it's like nothing here is really jumping out. You know,
Virtual Hamster would have been the weirdest, coolest idea that they ever did, in my opinion.
Right.
But yeah, I agree. Like maybe Outrun, but we already had that.
Waterworld, that would have been like the ultimate fail, you know, like
right.
Waterworld for the 32X.
Right.
Ugh.
So not too many. I mean, Sonic Mars, whatever that was. Literally, if you click on it's just a picture drawing on it, like on a piece of paper of Sonic. That's it. That's all that they show. Yeah.
Wing War would have been cool because that falls in the category of arcade games. Mm-hmm. But like that really should have been the focus. Model 1 arcade games, because when you go to the Sega Retro Model 1 list of games, there's some there. There's Virtua Formula, Wing War. Well, Star Wars Arcade, I forgot to mention that. That's a must-own. That one's really fun.
It was a launch title, too.
It was, yeah. So, again, like, they had a sizable library of arcade ports, but they didn't market it that way, and they really should have. They kind of did, actually. If you look at... they had a little logo. Let me see if I can find it. Arcade Classics up in the corner there. You see that little circle?
Oh, yeah. That logo's
but
all
it's
right.
not that... Yeah, it's not that well represented. Like, I don't know.
This one says that Dynamite Heady was supposed to get one. We talked about that one in...
that would have been cool.
Yeah, I like that game. That's an underrated game for sure. Good episode we did on it too, so go check that out. Now let's talk a little bit about logos. I know you're a graphic designer, Barry, by trade. Let's look at the 4 different logos from different regions, and you can tell me which ones you like the best. So we got this is the American one, right? The first one, the 32X with the red X and the yellow on top. That one's cool. What do you think about that one? Now.
I like that one. I like the colors.
Kind of reminds me
it's,
of the Game Gear when they had the 3 little colors, but this is actually incorporated into the logo. You know what I'm talking about?
I actually really like... I really... One of my favorite things of Sega at this time was the... like the striped color coordination, so that they really looked cool on a shelf. Between the Sega CD 32X, Genesis, and Saturn. Mm-hmm. So I think the US box art is probably the peak 32X right there with that logo. And
then there's this Japanese one. You can't see there's a black stripe because the OBS has a black background, so the black stripe under the 32. But the Japanese one with the blue, I think that was clean.
Nice.
Yeah, it's nice. It's clean. It doesn't look extreme enough for America, in my opinion, because it literally has an X. So
and it's the Super 32X,
right? And the European one.
I know the European fans are going to hate me, but I was never a fan of the the Mega Drive and 32X look. It just... Why didn't they just use the Japanese logos? I don't know.
Right. I don't get it. And and then the last one is the Brazil one, which I think is better than the European one, but it's too much McDonald's.
Someone else, they did something else. Was there there was that online add-on for the Genesis called like the X something. Remember that?
I'm trying to remember. I don't remember.
X-Band? Was that it?
X-Band is the online thing, isn't it? Where it was also on the Super Nintendo?
I don't know. It just kind of gives me that. If you look at the X-Band logo, it kind of reminds me of the X-Band logo, where it just looks like a little like offbeat, handwritten swooshy. I don't know. It looks a little wacky, but I guess it's all right.
I'm trying to look for it, but Google keeps on giving me like the band X band. I didn't know there was a band, but cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So which one of you? I mean, I like obviously the U.S. one because that's the one I grew up with. I think it reminds me a lot of like I don't know. I just like the colors they used, and then the Japanese one's the second one, and the other two whatever.
Yeah, I would say Japan. I probably neck and neck with the Japanese and the American one. I think the Japanese box art actually looks really nice now that I look at it. But Super 32X, what a strange. It feels like a Nintendo. They really What I don't like is they don't show Mega Drive anywhere, which is weird because you need a Mega Drive to play it.
Right.
Europe does it correctly, called Mega Drive 32X. Genesis 32X, but then it's the Super 32X, which feels like a Nintendo console. It's kind of weird.
Should have been called the Mega 32X, right? I mean, that was your branding.
Yeah, and that's what they called the Mega CD. And I wasn't until recently that I was like, oh, it's not called the Sega CD, it's the Mega CD.
I think Nintendo calling it Super was probably a really good marketing move because it literally made it be like, oh, it's like the other Nintendo, but Super version of it. So every game had to have Super in the front because it literally means kind of superior, really, if you think about it. I mean, it was pretty brilliant in their part. Mega was kind of close. They should have just kept on using it, but. So let's talk about the advertisement. Obviously, it's a console add-on, so it's going to have a lot of advertisement. We're going to be looking at the North American because it was made in North America, and it had a lot of ads. So I don't want to be talking about every Brazil ad, you know. So the first one we have here is the change the way you play ad. It's kind of making it like it's a secret unlockable or whatever. I don't know. Would this make you buy it? I think it's a little plain. I don't really like this one.
Yeah, it's a little weird. Change the way you play. X is next, and you won't believe what it does to your Sega Genesis. Imagine like seeing this and you don't know what it is. So Genesis 32X is about to bring the pulse racing, eye-popping, heart-pounding, brain-buzzing 32-bit gaming experience home. Oh, to Sega Genesis owners. So I have a Genesis, so I just buy this. Quick. Get the whole scoop by making one free phone call today. Wait a minute, George. It's a phone number. Should we call it?
You should call it 32X Sega.
All right.
Can't believe
Let's try it. So
they had their own phone line just for the
800 329 SEGA.
It's gonna be a phone.
Right,
it's gonna be a porn. It's gonna be a porn line. Oh
Welcome to America's hottest talk line.
Told you.
Guys, hot ladies are waiting to talk to you. Press 1 now.
Don't
ladies,
press 1.
To talk to interesting and exciting guys free, press 2.
Whoa.
Nah.
So there's some X, but not 32X.
It cut out my headphones too, but I'm sure you heard the porn.
Yeah.
Hot guy right now.
Not
I'll do
right
that
now.
when we hang up.
Okay.
I'm talking to a hot guy right now. What am I talking about?
That's what I'm saying. I almost felt kind of like, oh my god,
Sorry.
I guess I'm not a hot guy.
I mean, you own a 32X. Well, you don't, so
No,
I guess
I
you're
don't.
not hot.
No, okay, you're right. I don't have the X factor.
No.
This is the most popular Sega ad for the 32X. The Mommy, what are these two Sega machines doing? Have you seen this one?
This is the one I was kind of citing because they do mention so it says they're making an arcade system, dear, which plays into what I was saying they should have pushed this as to begin with. But then look at the games they call out.
Right.
Golf Magazine, Doom, Motocross Championship, and Cosmic Carnage. None of those are arcade games. The only ones are Virtua Racing and Star Wars Arcade. And they really put the focus on this stupid kid's face instead of the games. And then this weird X is next. They were really trying to make that a thing.
Yeah, and what did X even stand for? I mean, I think they were just trying to like gimmick their way about X-Men being popular at the time, Extreme X-Force and all this.
Right.
That's what it was in the early 90s, really, like Image Comics and all that.
And the way they market it, too, they show it just popping on the top. That's not how it worked. That's false advertising. Right. And then they say all these little, like graphical things. The arcade experience at home for about $160. Whoa, that's a lot of money.
Is that what it says?
Yeah, the arcade experience at home for about $160. Like, did you just casually drop $160? And that's a lot.
Right, especially back then. How much is that today, in 94 to today? A lot.
A lot.
Right,
Yeah.
I was going to say. The next ad we got, oh, yes, more, faster, playing on the idea of, sex, right?
Right, it's fucking...
Right, because it makes it faster.
Whoa.
It makes it faster.
The 32X is fucking the Genesis.
And that was basically the whole marketing behind it, which is kind of weird because I don't know why that would sell a console. But what do you think about the games they showed on this? Because I wouldn't buy it. Like, one looks like a Sega Genesis game.
Yeah, Tempo.
Yeah, so I'm like, I would be like, why? I could just buy these on my Sega Genesis.
Well, again, if the focus should be the games and their graphics, why are the screenshots so small? And why are you focusing on this weird, like, adult content? And it reminded me, someone told me, I really love your Sega talk. I teach grade school, but I don't tell my kids to listen to it because you swear.
Wow.
And I just did the 32X is fucking the Genesis. But that's what it's doing. I mean,
and that was the
ad.
marketing. It's like, I don't know, you would that was literally the focus of it. The next one is 1 + 2 = 32X. And I don't think this would have sold anything. Like, it's just showing you.
Yeah, and again, it's wrong. It's not plug and play.
No, but they sold
it's
it
not.
like
And
that.
you know what is the power base converter, but not this.
Nope. They should have advertised the power. I guess nobody really cares about Master System, right? So I guess it wouldn't even matter if they advertised
Well, no, and
it.
I think I talked offline, or I was talking in our Discord about how confusing that was. How the Master System isn't even the Master System; it's the power base.
Right.
And how they didn't even call it the Master System player; they called it the power base converter. Like, again, just stupid ways that Sega referred to their hardware when they really should have just called it the Master System and then the Master System adapter.
Right.
Done.
Right.
Stupid.
I wonder if there's like some name thing they couldn't do, but they were making Master Systems in the end anyway. So.
Yeah, and the consoles, the cartridges don't even say for Master System. They say, like, Mega Cartridge.
Yeah. Oh.
It's stupid.
So we got 2 ads. One of them has a rapper, Chill EB, which Sega at the time was using to advertise the Sega CD and, I guess, the 32X. He made one album in the 90s, and I think he's more known for being the spokesman of Sega for this little time period, and that Sega game he made, Do Your Own Raps. So here's his Just Stick It ad.
Let's do it.
Machine has appeared in homes across America.
32X. Redouble his power.
Go! Just stick it in your Genesis.
Alright, baby.
Can we see that
But that's
again?
not how it works.
Let's go!
Wow.
Increase the power of the unit. Increase the power of the unit 40 times.
Hey man, your set was stolen. Back out!
So, what do you think about the games they showed? Again, they're playing up on the you just stick it in, but it's not really how it works. And they're trying to do this whole crazy vibe that they used to do with Sega stuff too.
I mean, I thought it was fine, but I really don't like this. Just like, that's such false advertising. They make it look like a plug and play, and it's not. It needs its own AC adapter. It needs a whole. We just went through how insane it is to connect with the Sega CD. It's almost like they don't want you to own a Sega CD because it's too complex to hook up.
Yeah,
so weird.
It is weird, and 10% return rate is, I think, huge for a console. Do you think PlayStation 5 had 10% of the consoles returned? They were selling out. They're still sold out, I think. So definitely, right. I don't think they're getting that. But they also tried to do a Sega 32X and Sega CD commercial in one go. which I think was smart, but they're so separated that it's weird that they even. I don't know. It's weird. Like they're not separated because they had games, but at the same time, it didn't play Sega CD games when you had to buy two different things. It was weird, but yeah.
Right.
I'll play it now.
For those who purchased something other than a Sega Genesis,
Yeah, that's it.
our sincere condolences.
What a waste.
When you start with a Genesis, you can always add a Sega CD. And new Genesis 32X. Everything else is cold and stiff.
Burial or cremation?
Burn it.
Welcome to the next level.
I actually really like that one because they make it's very clearly laid out. Mm-hmm. The problem is that the 32X was too expensive and it had a small library.
Right.
And the Model 2 Sega CD was probably a very good price at that time and it had a great backlog of games that you could dive into. But again, they're doing that just stick it in. They didn't say that, but they definitely show it just like popping it on the top. No, it's not plug and play, guys.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that a Model 1 Genesis with a Model 2 Sega CD and a 32X on top is like the ultimate configuration. It has stereo sound. It is a behemoth, but it's very cool to own, and that's what I own. I love it. I wouldn't change it, but ask me as a kid if I would have like gone down that progression of being like, oh, I got my Sega CD now time to get my 32X. Like, that would never happen. It's too expensive.
Yep, way too expensive. And it's funny that they made this whole, like, these consoles just die. When that is how the generations work. Like, it actually hurt Sega's image in the long haul having these add-ons, if you think about it. Because people that invested in it felt like they got stung, right? Like, they didn't develop for them long enough. And then now they wanted them to pay $400 for Saturn. Like, not very good reputation going forward, in my opinion.
No.
So, but it's a cool commercial. It reminds me of the old Sega stuff, like the Genesis stuff, where they like make fun of the competition in a like unique way. So, let's end it with the legacy of the 32X. The legacy of the 32X is a complicated one. By the way, this was done by ChatGPT in the end, just because I wanted to see what it would say, and I was like, oh, it's pretty good, I'll just use it. While the add-on itself was not a commercial success, it did have some impact in the gaming industry and on Sega's own history. One of the most significant legacies of the 32X was the role of development of the Sega Saturn console. I don't know how. The 32X was originally intended to serve as a stopgap between the Genesis and Mega Drive and the Saturn, but the failure prompted Sega to accelerate development of the Saturn and release it earlier than it originally planned. Another legacy of the 32X was the influence on game design and graphics. The add-ons 32-bit graphic capabilities helped push the boundaries of what was possible on the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive. And some games released on the 32X are still considered impressive from a technical standpoint. Additionally, the 32X has become somewhat of a cold object of fascination for retro gaming enthusiasts who appreciate its unique design and place in gaming history. The 32X has also been a subject of several documentaries and retrospectives, which have helped keep the legacy alive. Overall, the Sega 32X may not have been a commercial success, but its impact on the gaming industry and Sega's own history can still be felt today. Thank you, AI.
I guess, I mean, you could argue that, like, Adolf Hitler was a terrible person, but he did make his mark on history.
Yeah,
like,
and it's still felt today.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like all those things are like, well, it caused them to rush the Saturn. It caused it to have some good-looking games. Like, okay, that's nice. And it's a cult object.
Right. Not very good, because you could say that about like, you could be like, the TurboGrafx 16 opened up the doors for new competitors to go in. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Oh, how nice. Oh, man. Well, I guess to wrap things up, should we see what our Patreon... Yeah.
Do we have some memories, or you...
We have We have so many memories that I'm going to cut my memories short, and I will let these be my memory. Their memories are my memories.
Oh,
so
that's nice.
We have Daniel Andres, who opens with, I think this is signature catchphrase, "Oh my goodness." I hope he's like got this like southern drawl. "Oh my goodness, the SEGA 32X is."
That would make it better.
He's like fanning himself on the porch. "Oh my goodness, whew, that 32X." Well, it exists for one. It isn't the worst console ever made, but if I had to pick a quote, unquote, worst Sega console, unfortunately, it would be this one. Not to say it doesn't have its merits or positive qualities. It's definitely a powerful piece of tech for the Genesis, and it does have a unique library of games, much like every other Sega console. I remember when I first got this guy, I didn't feel much of any positive feelings. It felt weird and off to own it, but I still do have the same model to this day. It was several years ago. To me, it is worthy to be called a Sega console, and over time I've grown to love it. However, this may not 100% be true, but I feel as though this console's reputation and existence is a big part why Sega doesn't make home consoles anymore. I do really like the games on it, but I wish all of them were on the Saturn instead. I'm sorry, 32X. It's not impossible to appreciate / love you, but it is hard to sometimes. We have Brian Trung saying, "Hey guys, I was someone who got their 32X and Doom at Christmas. I was obsessed with the shareware version of Doom on PC, so being able to play it on my TV through my Genesis instead of trying to figure out how to get it running on my dad's computer via DOS was too enticing to pass up. I still loved it despite the fact that it was clearly leading terrible music and 6 to 7 cut levels, as well as missing 2 bosses. I was amazed by how much better Mortal Kombat 2 looked and how many more sound effects it had. The arcade conversions, particularly Virtua Racing and Virtua Fighter, were great. Chaotix, yeah, exactly. Chaotix looked and sounded great, although the level design and gameplay were not. Too many of the games were rushed and not discernibly better than their Genesis counterparts, or felt more like tech demos, including Metalhead and Cosmic Carnage, than full-fledged games. The potential was never completely tapped. The amazing Doom Resurrection 32X project shows what the 32X could produce, a better Doom port than the Atari Jaguar. Yeah, I played that recently, and that's really cool. Still, the ports of Virtua Racing and Mortal Kombat 2 I enjoyed playing, including over the Saturn versions, and the amazing Doom Resurrection 32X project gives me hope that there will be more amazing ROM hacks and homebrew 32X projects in the future. The last 2 people we have here, we have Ben Hayward saying, "I have never played the 32X and none of my friends ever had one back in the day, but I always thought it was pretty funny that a gaming company that marketed itself on being super cool made an add-on that looked like a mushroom." Yeah, it did look like a mushroom. Right. Michael S. Ends things for us here saying, "I remember seeing a lot of these brand new piled up in a bargain bin. I never played or knew anyone that had one. I figured it was bad since there were so many on sale." And he makes a great point. That's what I was saying. Like, as kids, we saw this stuff on clearance. We weren't like, "Oh, this stuff's going to be $500 on eBay in 20 years. We were just like, "Oh, that's garbage. I don't want garbage."
Right. And, I mean, there wasn't a retro market because even back then, like, nobody was buying Ataris. I think Ataris are pretty cheap still, right? Like, they never really increased in value as much as, I don't know, like the Sega Saturn games did.
Yeah, no, Atari's kind of stagnant, yeah.
Yeah, it's weird, huh, how that works.
Yeah. It is.
And what are we going to be talking about next time?
Well, next time, if you can't tell, but I am in the process of moving, so I'm playing my life event card, and I'm going to do an episode that it's still going to be interesting, but it's going to be a little easier than like a mega epic RPG. We're going to be talking about Angry Birds, and I'm not joking, because Sega bought Rovio, and I think it would be really cool to talk about some modern happenings in Sega news, while at the same time talking about a game that is essentially a Sega-owned game. Now, right. Angry Birds.
Right. It's a Sega IP now. Interesting.
I guess so.
I guess.
Yeah.
We'll catch you guys on the next Sega Talk. Bye.